Welcome, Dr. Mike Ormsbee, to the Body Pod. So
Thank
excited to
you.
have you here today.
It's been really cool. We were just talking offline about some friends that are mutual to us, so I'm finding it happy to connect with you.
Yes, and I actually just spoke with Abby Smith Ryan, who I know you know too, like 30
Yeah.
minutes ago. So full circle.
That's that's great. Yeah, I actually was speaking with her this morning as well, probably before you talk.
Yeah, she's great. And I have to say, while I was diving into kind of the questions I wanted to ask you here, I
Yeah.
discovered that you were a triathlete and that you're a cyclist.
Yes. Well, I have to preface it. I was active in that space for quite a long time. But when we started having children is when that sort of changed for me, when the time commitment that I was trying to put into that wasn't my priority anymore. So yes, I love it. We still work with a lot with endurance athletes. I did um, pretty decent stuff, like up to like a half Ironman distance in triathlon. Wasn't winning anything, but had a great time for a decade training and racing and all that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Me too. I stopped, I only did 70.3, but I stopped 2019, 2018, and that was my last one. Didn't know it at the time, but that was my last one. And now I just ride my bike. So I much prefer to cycle, and I go to Europe once a year to kind of ride there. And it's the only sport that I can do nonstop and not ever get tired of. So
That's great. Finding that one thing is so useful.
yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to dive right in because I'm dying to get your take on, first of all, let's start with pre-sleep feeding for females. And I have to say, my mind is completely blown on this because in every course that I've ever done, we've always been like, nope, circadian rhythm, don't eat, 2 to 3 hours before bed. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden now I'm completely changing my mind. So let's start there and just tell me what your research has shown on this and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's a great story because you're right. There's a lot of confusing things about the messaging and just like most of these things, the nuances really matter. And what you would ask someone to do would really depend on what their goal is and how they even define eating before bed. And so let's sort of back up. I remember it was like 2008, 9, and 10. I was trying to get like a niche topic to sort of dive into. And I was coming off competing as an athlete in college, as an ice hockey player, and then getting into triathlon. And I had a lot of friends who were in that space, but also in like the bodybuilding world and the figure world and all these different athletes. And every one of those athletes ate at night, and they all ate before bed. Late at night, they're having eggs or cottage cheese or a protein shake or maybe some fruit with it, something that was reasonable. It wasn't an all out like fast food go or pizza or ice cream at that time, but it was food to fuel for the next day. And so, right about that same time, The Biggest Loser was on TV. And I remember hearing all the trainers on that saying, don't eat after 6 or 7 p.m. There are these cutoff times. And so, that was sort of my first dive into it was around 2010 to 2012. We did our very first study in that space, and we're like, you know what? Let's just see what's going on. Why can't we eat at that time? What is the problem? And so we took a stance of like an applied research laboratory, metabolic aspects of pre-sleep feeding, and exactly sort of like what was tolerable. And we wanted to know good or bad. Like I'd like to know for myself, was it a good thing to eat these things or was it bad? And so in that context of smaller protein-centric type meals or snacks, we're looking at, probably less than 300 calories. A lot of the work is right around 250 or even just shy of that of a protein dominant food. Um, Looks like it was actually either doing nothing or was a benefit to certain markers. And so the story there is actually pretty neat. So our lab and one other lab overseas was doing this, and they were looking at muscle metabolism. We were looking at fat metabolism, and so we sort of paired all these topics together. And like, let me ask you this, Hailey. Like, when you think of pre-sleep feeding, what time are you thinking of when you think about eating it? And are you thinking about your largest meal? And there's the confusion. Like, is it dinner where it's like a large mixed macronutrient meal, carbs, fats, proteins, the whole thing, and it's 5, 6, 800, 900 calories, and it's one bolus? With that definition, there probably is not a great reason to eat that before bed, like right before bed. And
Yeah.
then how long after that meal before you go to sleep? And so we have a very strict definition of it. It's 2 hours after dinner and within 30 minutes of going to bed is how we define pre-sleep feeding with these protein dominant foods. And that's we focused on protein because we have a big interest in protein, but also it was like what people were doing. We wanted to see what was actually happening in these more athletic contexts, the people who were interested in health and performance and competing again the next day. So with that definition, it changes it, right? Like Hailey, like let's say you work out at night. You work all day long, you're a working mom, you finish work, you get your kids to bed, and then that's your only time. And you're so dedicated that you say 8 to 9 p.m., 9 to 10 p.m. is the only time I have. I'm going to do it then. And let's say you exhaust yourself and you really put in a good effort at that workout. If you then want to also say compete in your race, your cycling race the next morning, or another really good effort tomorrow, you better eat because you need to
Yeah.
restock those fuel sources in order to compete well. And if you think about outside of like the individual sport athletes, if you're in a team setting and you have doubles and it's summertime and you're trying to, compete hard every day for like a camp scenario or something like that, then you better be eating at night. And so sometimes it's not even is it good or bad? It's like, this is required. You have to do this to compete. Here's a good example. We were really fortunate to do work with a race called the Florida Ultraman. Have you ever heard of this race? It's a
Not
it's a
that one, but
very yeah, so
I'm
the
familiar with
Ultraman's
others.
insane, right? They're
Yeah.
so long. They're really, really long races, and the athletes are awesome. And we had a great relationship with the Florida Ultraman race director, so we had access to the athletes. And it's a 3-day triathlon, and the time stops at the end of each day. So, like the faster you finish on Friday, you have more time to eat, recover, do what you need before you go to bed and wake up super early the next day. But if you're finishing in the evening and you're not a fast finisher, but you're going to finish, you're finishing and it's dark out. And then you
Yeah.
have to get up at 5 in the morning to do it again. And you actually ride, run, or swim all day long for 3 days straight. And in that scenario, if you get off your bike and you're used to eating gels and drinking, liquid carbohydrates and proteins, and then you try to go to bed and do it again, you will not make it to the finish line. And so that's what I always mean by nuance. And so even the bigger companies that you might see on social media that often are saying, we've got white paper evidence showing that heart variability is disrupted and your sleep is disrupted. The nuance isn't there. So I always, as much as I know I shouldn't do it, I always try to comment and say, it for who and in what setting? And are you working out in the evening? Are you perhaps you're an athlete that's struggling with energy availability? And in that sense, using that nighttime slot to get one more feeding is a good idea, just to get total
Mhm.
energy up for that particular person. So there are so many nuances to it. And so there's where I'm commenting, like, for who, what scenario, are you an athlete? Are you competing again tomorrow? And what's your ultimate goal at the end of all this stuff? So there's sort of the nutshell of it. And I'm happy to go through the nuances, but I figured I'd lay it up with that sort of a background.
No, that's great. Because I think for me specifically in these groups, I'm always trying to teach alongside my experts to fuel for the demands of the training session. And whatever that training session is, we know that we need more carbohydrate for potentially a
Yeah.
really hard hit session or a really hard strength training session, but maybe not as much for if you're going for a walk the next day or whatever. And I only work with middle-aged women, so women pretty much in this peri slash post-menopause space, which is getting a lot of chatter if you haven't
Yeah.
noticed.
Oh, I noticed. Yeah, that's great. It's
Good
it's
and
phenomenal.
yeah, good and bad. But here is where the science, I'm super intrigued with any expert to kind of break up your take on if this population, so if you everything that you just said. Now, if we're taking a middle-aged woman that already has, most women are time crunched, They're probably not recovering well or sleeping great in this perimenopausal space. So you already have these things going against you, even if you are healthy and eating well and blah, blah, blah. But for someone that isn't really competing and is just wanting to get up the next day and say, Hailey, tell me what to do in the weights room.
Yep.
Does this matter as much, or is it kind of negligible of, well, are you hungry a little bit before bed? What time did you eat dinner? I mean, I go to bed early, so for me, I like to be tucked in by 8:59.
Nice.
It doesn't always work. It
I
doesn't
like it.
always work. But now that my two teenagers are out of the house and I only have one at home, it makes it a little bit easier. But in that situation, does that matter for not looking at performance?
Yeah, I would say it almost matters more. And here's why. If you're in that scenario, which it sounds like everybody who's listening to this is, we still have a trouble meeting our total daily protein needs. It is hard to hit those sometimes, even if you have the best laid plan. And what
Mhm.
we're finding is that it's probably not magic of eating at protein before bed. It's the magic of having one more feeding time to get your total daily protein intake to a level that you want it to be at for all the other benefits that that brings. And you do not have to be worried about it adding fat mass. And I can show the data or we can talk through the data on that. And so psychologically, it allows you the freedom as someone who is in that space, super crunched on time. You didn't get the protein in you needed. Your kids are whining and complaining, and you need to, figure out life. And then guess what? You've got one more chance to top off your protein stores in this particular scenario. It's easy because you're already at home and you have access to those foods. It's hopefully a quiet time when you're trying to do your de-stress and start your bedtime routine, perhaps. And you don't have to worry about any of the like issues that people are afraid of with adding fat or fat gain or any of it. When we make the caveat of small protein centric meals. And so here's the example. We have a technique in our lab, Hailey, that's really cool. It's called microdialysis. And with microdialysis, we can insert these very small probes into any tissue that we want. Think of it almost like a belly piercing. So we pinch a layer of skin in your abdominal belly fat, for example, and we put a small needle into that tissue, remove the needle, and we leave this flexible probe underneath the skin. And in that probe, I can end up measuring what's coming out of your fat cells in any condition. So it can be sleeping, it can be exercise, it can be whatever sort of stimulus we give to the body. It could be eating. And when we've done this in men and in women. And in both cases, we don't see any change in overnight fat coming out of the fat cell, which would be called lipolysis. And so with lipolysis staying no different than a placebo, we know that it's not changing insulin enough or any of the hormones really to have an effect that's dampening or lowering the fat metabolism response. It all stays elevated, no matter if you have nothing or if you have this protein drink. And so if the net gain is nothing, but you're having the advantage of a more protein in your day, it's a win. It's
Yeah.
a win across the board. And so that's to me would be for this what your question was, like these very busy 40 plus year old women who've got lives and children and trying to do everything for everybody probably. This is a time when you can say, hey, this time's for me. I can have a shake, I can have a little bit of cottage cheese or yogurt. Now, not all of those foods have been tested, but my suspicion is that all of those protein centric foods would be really good options for this particular example.
Oh, I did it last night. I tested the theory because I have been so busy the last few weeks that I'm barely, I mean, usually I'm pretty good and pretty routine, eat the same things, roughly the same foods, but I've just been running on empty. And so these late time kind of meal snacks. And I think that's the difference. So if you're saying, if we look at sleep architecture, then when we hear about like heavy food, like food sitting in the belly and not digesting, and we want that all digested before ideally we go to sleep, or where the sleep hygiene conversation comes in, then this really is just like it is what you said, a snack of protein. It's not having, a glass of wine before bed, all of these things that we know will
Right.
hinder sleep architect, like the sleep efficiency. So I think that could be really helpful, especially for women that are, and most women, I think, at least that I'm working with, aren't as afraid that it's going to make them fat, but they're on limited calories because most of the time they're coming to me for body composition help. And so, that window is how do you get us all of this protein in, which then takes me to my next question of intermittent fasting. I mean, this is a huge conversation in the menopausal space of do we fast, do we not? Usually the answer, I'm curious your opinion, is it depends, which, makes it hard because everyone wants a specific answer for everyone, and that's really hard to do. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? Because for me, it shortens the protein feeding window if we're just looking at hitting protein overall.
Yeah, so kind of two things. To close out, or maybe part of that other conversation, I think it's important too that people understand that what I'm referring to in all of these are research studies with many people. And if you know that anytime you eat anything, you don't sleep well, then that's true for you. And you
Mm.
need to pay attention to that. So even if the literature says one thing, you need to know how you respond to it. So I love how you said you experimented with it last night. And that's what really matters when it comes down to it, is how do you respond to it. So I think that's an important piece to this. And one of the other things we didn't go into too much detail in that space was like the outcome measures. And so outside of fat metabolism. So we see that there's either no change or an increase in morning resting metabolism, which means that you've been sort of revving just a little bit higher all night from some of these
Oh.
protein-centric drinks. So that potentially could be helpful if you expanded that over a long period of time. So that's sort of one. It's also important to know that if you're new to exercise or you've never done it and you're just starting, and in our study, which was in women, in this category, we gave them the pre-sleep feeding, and it didn't actually help much or at all with like glycemic control, even with the protein drinks. So small changes in like insulin sensitivity and blood glucose, which were not going the direction you would want. Okay. So that made me think, oh, maybe we shouldn't do it for people who are sedentary. And so we decided to use that same group and add exercise. And so just 4 weeks of including just 3 days of exercise and pre-sleep feeding, and this overweight to some of the women had obesity, middle-aged group, if they added exercise and did the pre-sleep feeding, absolutely abolished any metabolic problems. And so the exercise is such a sledgehammer in driving our metabolic responses to things that pre-sleep feeding then ended up being either the advantage or no change, while the exercise needed to be in there. So if you're someone who's sedentary and just adding in pre-sleep feeding, then I think you would need to watch blood glucose levels. Again, not many studies in that exact space, but from the one or two that exist, I would say be cautious with that approach. So just, make sure it's not everything's positive. There are pluses and minuses to anything that's chosen. And then some of your clients and people who are interested, maybe they do train hard and they are elite at their age, or their age group athletes or something. That's where this could be interesting, in that there are data showing that after an evening bout of exercise, this was soccer, if you had pre-sleep protein, it actually had things like reactive strength index and counter movement jump were able to come back to normal faster after a hard game. So theoretically, you could compete more or better, or maybe just a little bit harder each time you do compete, because that lasted for 3 days. The benefit was higher for performance for roughly 3 days. So that's there. And then there's also an advantage to muscle protein synthesis. So the other group I was talking about overseas that runs this is Luke Van Loon and his group. And they've found in a ton of different studies that it actually increases muscle protein synthesis while you're sleeping with a small protein dominant snack. And in their hands, they actually have seen over 12 weeks of training with this strategy, where again, it was used to increase total daily protein. They just took it before bed. They had better outcomes for like cross-sectional area, muscle strength, all the things that you might be looking for a trained individual who's like a gym goer, wanting to add muscle to their frame. So a little more context there with what outcomes people are finding. And again, it's a little bit mixed, but what I'm telling you is like the summary of the good points, and that's where you would use this strategy.
Where have you been for the last 3 years?
Hailey, I think it's exciting. I think it's a neat place, but again, it's N of one. And that brings me back to your original question, which was intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting, as you said, you probably have five experts. They all say something different, or at least it's confusing enough to say it depends. And I'm not going to help you at all there. It is still depends, but I'll tell you this from my experience working with lots of different people in research studies and even in coaching, it's a great tool. It's a fantastic tool if you like to intermittent fast. And so I never push someone away from it if they like it. Some people have lifestyles where it really just suits them to wake up and not eat for a while. And some people don't. You wake up and you're starving. And so for me, I always push like follow what's natural to you and then just make the best choices with that. So we have folks who have used intermittent fasting, absolutely love it. It shortens the eating window, can control calories. And as you probably know all the data, like if you just choose to do a slightly caloric restricted and eat all day, at the end of a longer period of time, you tend to have very similar outcomes. So it's a great
Yeah.
tool. If you like it, use it. If you don't like it, don't use it. But it certainly is something that would work with this protein feeding that I'm talking about, depending on where you lay, where you decide to bracket your start and end time of eating. And so
Hmm.
if you bracket that in the morning, clearly you wouldn't be having that at night. If you bracket that in the middle of the day or you stop around 8 p.m., like 12 to 8, for example, again, you wouldn't have something later. But I will tell you this, I read a lot of studies that talk about fasting or intermittent fasting, and then you read the details and it's like, oh, but we allow an essential amino acid drink. Oh, but we allow a protein drink. And so it's like, is it really
Oh,
fasting or is it not? And so even if the title says intermittent fasting, there are several different times I've looked through it and it's like, yeah, it's fasting, but we do allow tea. We do allow, things that have small amount of calories. We do allow an essential amino acid drink just to maintain, amino acid levels in the system. So you have to look at that quite a sort of a nuanced lens. But for me, everything is possible to be a benefit, but it has to fit your lifestyle because if you can't stick to it, it's never going to work.
okay. That's the mic drop right there because this is while I think the internet in this day and age is so amazing, it's information overload. And then you get these, niche populations. Well, for this specific population of women that say I'm working with, and then they hear, well, I can't do this. Now I should do this. Now I shouldn't do this. Now I should do this. And it's this back and forth game with each, new article that comes out. And then women come to me and they're like, just tell me what to do. Tell me exactly what to eat and tell me what exercise to do. And I'll do it to a T. I'm really good at following through. And it's never that simple because we're all unique and individual. And while there are some, do you see some from your perspective, if we're looking at this, what are the overarching themes that we really have to nail besides the nuances of whether you're going to intermittent fast or, whatever in the nutrition and fitness space?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to talk about which levers to pull and what's, or you hear some conversations about, stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. And that's where the nuance is crazy. Like you probably have had these discussions. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't have time to always, to do everything perfectly, to get 2 training sessions, a cold bath, look at the sun, do all the different things. And so you have to choose with a busy lifestyle. What are the biggest things? And there's to me, you can really get that into 3 spaces: exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And if those big rocks are under control, the little other pebbles that fall out are much easier to manage. Or
Hmm.
you just aren't in a situation where you're trying to be on stage or compete in a thing. You just want to have a lifestyle where you feel pretty good. You can handle your lifestyle with your spouse and your kids, and in that sense, those 3 big items are exactly where I'd be landing. And then I might think about, all right, nutrition is pretty well dialed in, but I don't really like eating in the morning. So maybe intermittent fasting is something that I would try. And, I wouldn't even get there until I had the basics lined up for those other areas. And Hailey, I agree with you. Like people all the time, they're like, I don't get it. I was told to not eat before bed. I was told to eat before bed. And then so I think it can be far easier than that. And I think it's a stepwise approach. Like what's the simplest possible thing you can change today that you barely even notice it in your lifestyle that would then add up over time to be a big impact. So, for example, one of the courses that I have online, we finish it with these small steps. And it's like every chapter in that book is, where do you finish and what's the one action item you can take today? Maybe it's increasing your protein intake just a little bit. And that's all you do for like 4 weeks to dial in that habit. Or maybe it's something like, your vitamin D is super low. And so you take a vitamin D supplement, and that's the only thing we ask you to change. And your clients might be like, what in the world? I'm paying you to do this and that. It's like, yeah, but if you stick with me, this is the key, is getting all of these big ticket items where it's so routine, you stop thinking about it. And so for
Mhm.
me, those are the bigger sort of levers that I can pull um, in order to sort of set my boundaries, set my baseline for where I can eventually get to. I always know I can fall back on these three things: exercise, nutrition, and sleep.
So true. And this is what I have with some of my, high profile clients that are, running companies or whatever. They don't have time for me to micromanage them at all. I mean, and really I'm just like, okay, if we do the basics, it doesn't the nuances that come from, again, like you said, eating before or eating after, or doing this kind of cardio versus this kind of cardio. At the end of the day, are you doing something resistance training? Are you sleeping well, recovering well, and is your nutrition pretty on point?
No
Um,
doubt about it. No doubt
that's
about it. And I know
boring.
it's so boring. Do you know what the name of that course is? It's called Changing Body Composition Through Diet and Exercise. So nobody wants to click on it, but it's just like hearing me in a lecture. I'm going through lecture by lecture. What do these things actually mean? And it's just a science. You end with like, these are the tools. Hopefully now you have the ability to use those tools as you want. And I think, you mentioned resistance training, and that's such a critical piece to this. And I think I think it's the part, and I know you have other guests that kind of go through these things, but that piece is so critical. We always say, like, if you want to be a smaller pair, then just do the slow aerobic exercise. You'll be a smaller pair. But if you want to actually
Mhm.
change the way that pair looks, then you have to add in the resistance training to sort of sculpt out what that will eventually look like. And so one of the studies we're running right now might be of interest. It's specifically in postmenopausal women. And these are women that are also pre-diabetic and either overweight or have obesity. And we are directly for the first time comparing aerobic exercise to resistance exercise on outcomes of fat metabolism. And this is a 5-year study we've been running now, Hailey. Um,
Okay, do
it's
tell.
it's it's phenomenal. And so these women are all awesome. They really want help. They come to us because of that. And they get training for 12 weeks, and it's either straight aerobic training or straight resistance training. And in most of the research you probably have seen to date, it's aerobic heavy. It's switching now, like a little more resistance training in women specifically, but a lot of it's aerobic dominant type research for weight and control. And that's
Mhm.
because when you compare 20 minutes of running to 20 minutes of weightlifting, your calorie burn is going to be far higher in the running. You're
Yeah.
burning more calories with that. And so there's a couple other studies who have tried to pair these together, but they paired them on time. So you would work out for, say, 45 minutes in both groups, but the calorie burn was so much higher in one that it really shifted the conversation. And so what we've done is instead of matching time, we're matching calorie output. So you exercise to burn a certain number of calories. And so the resistance training group ends up working out longer, but they're burning the same amount of calories as the other group. And so now we're finally to a point where we're getting some data back, and we'll have plenty of things coming out of this lab based on what we're finding. But it's just awesome to watch how the strength training particularly is improving what you would think strength, and then you see the confidence come up. You see all of the ability to sort of handle the stresses that were thrown at them sort of come up a little bit. And even the aerobic group, they're new to exercise, so it's great. But then they all are starting to say, I wish I was doing some resistance training. I can see that group over there. I want to join that group. So we have fantastic awesome participants and a whole team here that handles the training and all of the outcomes. But we're looking at how are they utilizing fat? How are they putting on fat? What exactly is going on with microdialysis and biopsies and all the science techniques we can throw at them. And so we should have some really good answers here. And the hope is this, Hailey, is that at the end of it, that the guidance on what to do is less of um, uh, anecdote where we know we should be
Mhm.
resistance training, and it's more of they put these things head to head, and either there was no difference in the fat metabolism piece of it, or there was a greater improvement from being able to resistance train and add these other pieces of weight and strength to it, which, obviously have like longevity outcomes and other things that are quite useful for postmenopausal women.
I love that. So are you measuring and what are your thoughts on visceral fat? Because this is also a big one that changes for women as we kind of go into this menopausal transition.
Yeah.
Most women notice more abdominal fat. And when we look at visceral fat specifically, the question is always, how do I target it? Or how do I get
Yeah.
rid of it?
Yeah. So it's usually a multimodal approach. And so there are several studies that we've done in this space looking at visceral fat with resistance training, HIIT training, aerobic training, usually with a higher protein intake. And a lot of these are in men and women, but all of them middle age and many of them are peri or postmenopausal. And so in our work, I don't know if you remember years ago, there was a program called Body for Life that came out. It was
Oh,
kind of
did
the
it.
90s. Yeah, yeah. So that's when I was starting research in this space. And so a guy named Dr. Arciero had these grants, and I was a student in his lab, and we were just starting to figure out what's up with that particular program, because it was really the first time we got a big message to lift weights and add protein. And
Mhm.
so we decided to compare that particular program, which was resistance training 3 days a week and 3 days a week of high intensity interval training with 1 day off. So a 6 day program. And then we compared it to, at the time, which was the old food guide pyramid back then. And so the food guide pyramid, and then it was the basic recommendations that go along with it were increased physical activity 5 days a week. So it was everybody was exercising, but the one group got resistance training and specifically a higher protein intake that we accomplished through protein shakes and protein bars. So it was primarily through those mechanisms to jack protein up. And in our hands, we looked at DEXA, and we were able to calculate visceral fat and subcutaneous fat and changes over a 12-week study. And so these women were just awesome. Gosh, they worked so hard. And in that time, no matter what you did, starting an exercise program with some dietary instructions was helpful. So everybody
Mhm.
lost weight, everybody lost body fat, everybody gained a little bit of muscle mass. But there are really probably two giant things I learned from that. The resistance training and the protein in that group led to far greater, more significant changes in reductions in belly fat and visceral fat than not including a higher protein diet and not including resistance training. So by far, to attack that visceral tissue, at least in the studies that we've run, it's got to be a combination of something with the resistance training and a much higher protein intake than many people in general are typically eating when they're starting out on these types of programs. So that was really, really critical to us. The other part was that the women in that study were, for better or worse, they were so awesome, but they were so stuck on the body weight number
Mm.
as compared to the body composition number. And so I remember talking to at least three of those subjects that wanted to basically escape from the study because their body weight had not shifted enough for what they thought should be happening in a 12-week study. But then
Yeah.
I show them the DEXA data, and we see a giant drop in body fat and visceral fat and an increase in muscle mass. And I was hoping that would push them over the edge to say, okay, no, the composition is critical to this piece of it.
Hmm.
But we have to get out of our own way sometimes, Hailey. There's such a stigma on body weight, and it has got to shift to body composition because we're doing ourselves no favors by sticking in this weight only and just losing muscle mass in some of these programs that exist when you don't account with resistance training and a higher protein intake.
So if we look when you were doing the study, sorry, my mind was going two different places to remember to ask you another question. Were these women and men in a calorie deficit, or were you just having them resistance train over the
Yeah,
12
good
weeks
question.
or?
It depends on the study. The one I'm referring to was not it was they met with a dietitian weekly to keep them at their target calories, which was based on keeping them even. So it was based on we had to resting metabolic rate and their activity factors to keep them in a certain small range of caloric intake. And then we just manipulated the protein side of it and the exercise side so that the calories were equated. So in that particular study, it was over and above. So protein itself is pretty unique. We have done
Mhm.
so much work with not just a pre-sleep protein, but just daily protein changes. And in every single paper that I've put out on it or looked at or been associated with, if you're in a situation where you're an athlete, should have higher protein. If you're in a
Mhm.
situation where you're trying to recover more, probably should have higher protein. If you're in a situation where you want to be losing belly fat, you should probably have more protein. If you're in a situation where you're trying to lose weight in general, I would also increase protein. And so I get a lot of questions around, well, in this situation, that situation, would you increase it, decrease? I'm like, in every one of those situations, I would lock in and dial in protein at the level that we want, and then
Yeah.
manipulate the other macronutrients around that based on your exercise output.
Okay, so we can then, just to confirm that I'm hearing you right, we can change visceral fat without being in a calorie deficit then? That study showed yes?
That study showed with the higher energy output, more of energy flux. Yes, we actually had a reduction in the visceral fat in that particular study. Pretty great to see that. And I want to follow that, Hailey, with another really cool study I think your audience would really like. We were looking at a giant weight loss study. These were people who were looking to go get bariatric surgery. So they were going to a bariatric center to have surgery, and instead they see our team sitting there and we're like, hey, instead of having that surgery, come with us for some diet, for some diet and exercise. So as you can imagine, many people didn't want that. And so they went on their way. But we were able to
Yeah.
recruit a lot in for our work, which was run by a guy named Eddie Joe for his PhD dissertation that was run out of a colleague's lab at our university. And so when they came through and we actually recruited these people in, every one of them went on the medically supervised diet, which was required at the bariatric center. Do you know
Mhm.
how, do you know the calorie intake for a medically supervised diet, how low that is?
Under 1,000? A
Yes, it's
thousand?
about 800 calories is what it was when
Oh,
we did the study.
sounds
And it's
terrible.
and it's mostly liquid, and you're coming from a position where you're going for bariatric surgery. So the calories are far higher than that in your usual life. And then you quickly cut that down with mostly liquid foods to go through these. And it's just miserable, right? You do lose a lot of weight though, because you're just not eating much
Yeah.
at all. And so what we did is we took all these people and we said, it's actually a harm if we don't add protein to both of these groups, because on a
Hmm.
calorie on a grams per kg basis, they were like at 0.4 grams per kg, which is like half of the RDA, which we know is probably half of what we should be eating. So you
Yeah.
can do the math. It's very, very low based on total body size. And so when we added protein to both groups, it became a situation where it was like really cool to see where they all had a little bit extra protein. So it put their calories up to about 1,200 or so, which is still not very high, but it was at least better than 800.
Yeah.
And then one of those groups got resistance training, and the other one did standard of care, which was more like calisthenics and just walking and things like that. And after the period of that particular study, this is going back to the body weight versus composition. Both groups lost a ton of body weight, but the composition was so critical. So when they lost all that weight, the group that maintained or had the higher protein and got the resistance training, of their weight lost, let's say 24% of that weight lost was fat, and they only lost a teeny little bit of muscle along that way. Now, on the other hand, the group that got a little bit of protein but didn't do resistance training, they lost a significant amount of muscle mass in that period of time. So the end of the day, and I think I said that backwards. So let me just rephrase that. The group that did resistance training only lost 4% of their muscle mass. The group that did not do resistance training lost 24% of their muscle mass in that study. 24. So like a quarter of the weight loss was muscle. And so now if you stop doing that, you're at a place where you're smaller, but you also have way less muscle. And if you start to eat normally again, it's called weight recidivism. You're just going to put it right back on and go even worse with it. And so in my mind, that was like, gosh, out of the gate, we had data to show that in any of these giant weight loss studies, like you've got to be weight training, got to have higher protein in order to save your muscle mass.
Okay, so then the same conversation would apply to someone who's going on like a GLP-1 and losing a lot of weight, but not adding in resistance training and protein, but resistance training being the bigger rock for preserving muscle mass.
100%. Now, I haven't run those studies. I know a lot of those are coming out now and being done by colleagues of mine all over the place. But yeah, because it's just a different mechanism to lose the weight. But if the weight was coming off that fast, you better be doing something to maintain the integrity of your muscle mass, or you'll be just set up for other problems.
Okay, now this is going to be getting into the weeds here, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So, for the resistance training, did it matter what they were doing? And what I mean by that is a rep range, getting close to failure, using effort, or just, kind of going in and being like, okay, do your own thing, but you have to lift some weights.
Yeah, that's a good question, Hailey. That particular one was supervised, so they had a student trainer with them every single rep, every single exercise, and they were pushing for the sort of the normal recommendation. So it was full body exercise, and they had those 3 days a week, and then they had a rep range of around 8 to 12, and they were supposed to be hitting close to failure on the end of those. And so we had RPE scales, rating of perceived exertion scales for every single time they went through that. So yeah, it does matter. Like you need to be getting close to failure. And I'm sure you've had conversations about that. Like the weight probably is not as important. It's just, are you getting close to failure? And they were pushing themselves. They worked hard. They had a really good experience. It's actually helpful to be held accountable to somebody. They say that all the time. Like even if you're very well trained, it's nice to have a coach where
Oh, yeah.
someone can keep you accountable. And yeah, they were pushing themselves.
Okay, so let's move on to rep ranges since we're kind of touching on this. For women and in like this midlife area, is it is there only one way to train? Do we train all rep ranges? Do we get benefits from different rep ranges? I mean, I love to hear what any expert says and any kind of turn that they might have or difference that they might have in this specific population.
Yeah. I I don't know. If you ask my friends and stuff, I'm a pretty middle of the road kind of person. So
I like
once
it.
again, I don't know that I'll, be real controversial on anything, but the way that I see it, and based on my view of the literature, past coaching experience, and been in this field for 30 years, like there's a benefit to just about every type of exercise and every type of rep range to tissue, metabolism, performance, recovery, psychology, what have you. And so to me, if you like lower reps and heavier weight, then lift that way. If that's too heavy for you, or you're at an age where like you don't need to back squat so much anymore, like then just shift it a little bit and then you can use a different rep range. And so for me, I like to work through a full range of them. I have heavy days, I have light days. The people that we work with, the women that are highly active and are associated with our facility at the Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine, do that too. So there'll be a day of, even with the aerobic world, like a zone 2 day, and then there'll be like a higher intensity day, and there'll be heavy days and all that. And some of that's based on how you feel that day, Hailey, because there's something to auto regulation where you're in the gym or you're in your garage, wherever you're training. And some days you're just like, I'm dialed in. I can
Hmm.
totally go heavy today. That's what I want to be doing, but that's taxing on your nervous system. So I don't think you should do that every single day. And so we work through a wide range of weights, and also repetitions is what I would personally recommend. And there's some data to back up variety in general. So again, Paul Arciero's run many of these studies. I was associated with two or three of them. They're called PRIZE, and it's so the PRIZE is an acronym for protein is the P, resistance training is the R, I is intermittent like sprints, S is stretching or yoga, and then E was endurance. And so he compared in many different studies this PRIZE program to traditional exercises, and simply the variety that's provided with something different just about every single day was quite useful. And I think it would be useful for things in general, like compliance and wanting to go do something. It's not the same thing every day. But he also found greater benefits with that sort of approach for, like you said, visceral fat, abdominal fat, muscle mass, et cetera. And so outside of just rep ranges, even between types of exercise, I think that variety is really nice. And it keeps you ready, right? Like if my kids want to play on the playground, I want to be able to do that with them. If they want to do some activity, I hope I can still throw a ball or kick a soccer ball. So it keeps you sort of, it at least keeps me in the mindset of like, I can still hang with most things. So let's go ahead and try these different activities.
Absolutely. Okay, so another study that I would like your input on, which was super fascinating to me because I've never really cared that much about collagen. And when people ask me, I'm like, take it or don't. It's one other thing that I have to take. And now, after I've listened to some podcasts that you're on, I'm starting the collagen regularly from here on out. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so that's another one I felt the same way. Before we actually did the research on, I was like, I don't know, like it's not a complete protein. I don't think this probably isn't the way that I would be wanting to get my protein in. And so when the opportunity came up to study collagen, we made sure to do it right. When we chose a population that was great, and as I'm getting older, I'm like, hey, yeah, middle age is great. Let's study that. I want to see what happens. And so we took lifelong active people, lifelong active. It could be anything. It could have been golf, walking. It could have been even like high level elite athletes, but you had to be active your whole life. And then we ended up studying collagen intake at three different levels, like 0, so you took a placebo, 10 grams per day or 20 grams per day. And then we measured and we had them take the supplement for 9 months, which is the kicker. That's a very hard thing to pull off in the research world, is something that
Yeah.
long. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is like there's a lot of negativity around collagen. We want to make sure we didn't just go too short and that we don't want to finish and say, if we had done a little bit longer, maybe we would have seen something. So we wanted to take it all the way out. We also wanted to look and see if there's any changes in bone mineral density, and that won't change until at least a minimum of 9 months. So we were still just on the cusp of if we were going to see something, we might have seen it about that point. Um,
Mhm.
and so our primary outcomes were not muscle growth, which I wouldn't recommend collagen for. Our primary outcomes was joint pain. And a lot of middle-aged active people, one day or another, have joint pain. And so you couldn't have diagnosed osteoarthritis, but you had to have some type of reoccurring but not persistent joint pain. And so that's what we did. We lined it up. Shaloa Kiyevkovsky ran that study for her PhD dissertation, and she's phenomenal. And we did so much great work in that space. And what we ended up finding after 9 months of that was that taking the collagen was most beneficial if you were the most active people in the study. And so there were some benefits in some things we measured across the board, but if you exercised more than about 100 and I think it was about 160, 180 minutes a week, that's where those people ended up seeing the most benefit from taking collagen. If you were active, but it was less than that 150 minutes a week or so, that's where not so much was seen in those individuals. And the thought is that the most active people have the most opportunity to get collagen because it's very hard to get collagen where it needs to go. You have to have blood flow to the joints, and that only is really going to happen maybe when you're exercising. That those people are just so active that you had an opportunity to get the collagen, perhaps to these areas we were measuring for joint pain. Now, some nuances here, right? Let's always sort of cap this off. For in our hands, 10 grams seem to work a little bit better in most cases than 20 grams, and we don't know why. So that's
Okay.
interesting. Yeah, so 10 grams is what I take. 10 grams is what I typically recommend for people now. 20, it wasn't ineffective. It just had we had more of the outcomes changed in the positive direction from 10 grams. And I don't know why. We have some theories on it we're trying to test now with some ongoing work, but we still don't know why. And I think with the collagen conversation, it's like, how in the world would it be better than like a complete protein, like a whey protein? And that's where this a lot of negativity comes still. If you're talking
Hmm.
about muscle growth, collagen should not be what you're choosing to take. You should be taking away or casein or a soy supplemented product or something. The collagen specifically in my mind, because it's the only data I've seen that I believe is with this joint pain angle. And I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why it would help with these specific things other than the makeup of it with the glycine, the proline, hydroxyproline combination of these amino acids that are in high concentration in collagen also make up the tendons in the joint. So it's not that they're absent from a whey, they just are very much present in the collagen.
Mm,
And I think a lot of work needs to be done to say, why would it target a tissue? We don't know. But at the end of the day, the mechanisms are really, really critical, but the outcomes to me are even more critical. Do you feel better? Then take it and we can figure out the in between. And we
yeah.
work on it. And I'm not, putting down the mechanistic piece. We need to know that. But at the moment, it looks like pain is better if you're very active. Why not give it a try? It's not going to hurt anything, and it might help you.
No, this is great because I don't know any female or very few that does not have some kind of joint pain, especially postmenopause when we no longer have estrogen. That comes up a lot. And so this is great news. I mean, I started the protein last night. Now I'm starting the collagen today. I have it. I have loads in my house. If it's not sitting right out, I'm really good with creatine
Yeah.
and just getting protein, but then it's just one extra thing to like throw in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the
So,
thing. It's like the timing for it's also probably important for collagen. Like that would be like a pre-workout type time that you would want to take it before exercise if you can.
oh, okay, good. So they can take it if they're having some protein before, add it in there.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm
Okay,
starting to see it now. There's companies that are coming out with whey and collagen mixed together, so it's one thing. Just watch your
amazing.
dosing. Make sure you're getting the right dosing if you're looking at those products.
Okay, great. I'm so mad we're out of time right now. I feel like we got
I
two
know it.
things on my list done. But while we wrap this up, because I'm sensitive of your time and I just appreciate you so much, Mike. It's so great to get to know you and have a conversation with you. If people are looking for you, you said I know you have you're the author of two books. Two?
Yes, though, yeah, real fun read. So one's a textbook, which is an exercise physiology textbook, which is like a great like background resource if you're a trainer or someone in ex-phys and just need like the nuts and bolts. The other one's more of like it's a book and a course. What was made through a company called The Great Courses. That was bought by Wondrium. So it's like this continuing education courses, and it's not overly like entertaining. You're basically in a classroom with me, and they're 24 30-minute lectures, so you can listen to them like on a commute. Um, and it's just the nuts and bolts, but it's a really good base to have. Like if you want a base before you dig into like 100 podcasts that get confusing, it's a good base to have.
Oh, this is amazing. And this is for anyone, not just
Correct.
trainers or students.
Yeah, yeah, the great courses are really cool. They're like any topic you could imagine, but the one that I did was on changing body composition through diet and exercise, and it's for everybody. It's made at any level. It's a intra level.
Okay, great. So they can find that online or your
Yep.
Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
Yeah, so Instagram's just at Mike Ormsbee. And I try to put up everything from our lab there, a lot of our studies, these pre-sleep feeding things are things that are in and related to these topics we've talked about today. So it's a great resource there. And then yeah, the Great Courses thing is available just if you just Google that title and my name, you can find it. But Great Sort Courses, Amazon has it. couple easy spots. But yeah, I'd encourage a follow to see what we're up to, and love communicating with if anybody has questions.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much again, Mike, for your time. And I just appreciate what you're doing in the field and your willingness to talk to my audience, who I know are going to absolutely love this podcast.
Great. Thanks, Hailey. Anytime.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star review and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.
Until next time.